Well, I was born near New York City and grew up in a Catholic working class family and had a strong interest in spirituality even before I really knew what spirituality really was. And in my university years, I began to study Far Eastern traditions, particularly Buddhism. And I studied Sanskrit for a few years, and that was my entry into the subject of consciousness, because it was really consciousness and human development that I was interested in, more than religion in the conventional sense of the word. I see Sufism as being a discipline of human development through love, through the awakening and purification of the heart, which is the core knowing of the human being, the fundamental cognitive instrument that we have. So what to do with the heart, how to develop it, how to awaken it, I think this is a very fundamental human question, if not the fundamental human question. Well, I was studying these things during the late 60s, which was a time when spiritual teachers from around the world were coming to North America, and where there was a great new interest in consciousness arising. So I had an opportunity to meet a number of these spiritual teachers, and not just meet them, but to actually work with some of them, including a little bit of time at the Zen Center in San Francisco with the great Suzuki Roshi, and also with the teacher who focused on the practices of Gurdjieff and Zen. And so I had met masters of awareness, masters of will, masters of consciousness. But when I met a master of love, everything changed. And that was a man in his 80s from Turkey, whose name was Süleyman Dede. He was the Mevlevi Sheikh of Konya, Turkey, and that is a sheikh of Rumi's tradition. And when I met Dede, as we called him, I felt somehow a radiating love that was unlike anything that I had experienced. And to me that seemed like the true gold compared to other precious metals. But this was an entirely different experience, and I realized this really is what I was looking for, and I believe what every heart yearns for. And he was a humble, in a way, very ordinary man, but his ordinariness was truly extraordinary. And even though he was rather unsentimental and a simple man without a great deal of education, we felt a kind of melting process going on, and tears came to our eyes. I'm now speaking for my wife as well, and for other people that came to know him. And that experience of being loved was a very central experience in our lives. Not that I think we were very needy or even knew we were looking for that, nor was it the feeling of being loved by just a particular human being. It was more cosmic than that. It was the realization somehow that we live in a universe of love, and that we were created to know this, and we were created to experience the true dimensions of what, for lack of a better language, I'll call the divine love. that this is really the nature of being, this is the nature of the reality we live in, and it never became so apparent as when we were in the presence of this Sufi sheikh, and not only him, but other Sufis and other Sufi sheikhs. He wasn't unique, but he was exemplary, you might say. So there was a beauty in this experience that touched my heart. And I think for a long time I had been interested in something about the human being, some sense that human beings have a higher capacity for emotion than we normally think, that there are higher levels of emotional experience that are far beyond the typical emotions that psychology treats, like anger and fear and desire, but that there are much subtler levels of human emotion that could be experienced. And I was always interested in this, and now I was beginning to get the real material and to be among people who seemed to know how these experiences could be cultivated. It was as if there was a science of love, a science of the heart. But to call it a science is a bit misleading, because the science of the heart is very, very different from our quantitative sciences, such as physics and chemistry and biology. It's different because the science of the heart is a science of qualities, not of quantities. And it's the human heart, this instrument that we have, which is our core subjective experience. It's through this heart that we have a qualitative experience of this life. And what I mean by that is every human being, every normal, healthy human being at least, longs for relationship. Relationship is one of our most important and treasured experiences. Well, what is it that's sensing the importance, the beauty, the necessity of relationships? You could say it's the heart that is the organ of relationship. And to just simply be in relationship to another conscious being who is simply here, present with us, is one of the greatest experiences of life. But that's not the end of it, because the heart also can begin to move through stages of this experience to the point where we begin to sense that there is a presence operating in existence that we could also have a relationship with. And I don't mean to present this as if we're relating to some great infinite person in the form of a conventional idea of God, but know that there's something operating in all the events of life, in all the manifestations of life, an intelligence, a compassion, a nurturance that is guiding and educating us all, and that the heart senses this. When the heart is awakened, the heart becomes very sensitive to this presence. And as this develops in a mystic like Rumi, for instance, he begins to talk of some very great you with a capital Y. And one of the first questions to answer when considering the poetry of these mystics, and especially of Rumi, is what is this you? Who is this you that he's talking about? He may call it the beloved. That kind of gives it a metaphoric, personal form. But it's something that's beyond the personal. It is something truly cosmic. So I have a poem here that I think would be interesting to hear, that I think expresses this in beautiful poetic form. And it's called Nothing Happens Without You. And for somebody like Rumi and for Sufis, the presence of this you is something that is experienced through the heart. It touches us deeply. I don't think it's wishful thinking. I don't think it's fantasy. I think it is perceived by this instrument that we call the heart and can be verified by the mind, or it can be thought about by the mind, but it is not an experience of the thinking mind. It's an experience that comes to the heart when we begin to sense that this life is somehow purposeful and meaningful, and that there is just something going on beyond appearances that doesn't have to do with beliefs or theologies, but is a lived experience. And I think Rumi is attempting to express that when he says, should everything pass away, it couldn't happen without you. This heart of mine bears your imprint. It has nowhere else to turn. The eye of intellect is drunk with you. The wheeling galaxies are humble before you. The ear of ecstasy is in your hand. Nothing happens without you. The soul is bubbling with you. The heart imbibes from you. The intellect bellows in rapture. Nothing happens without you. You, my grape wine and my intoxication, my rose garden and my springtime, my sleep and my repose, nothing happens without you. You are my grandeur and glory. You are my possessions and prosperity. You are my purest water. Nothing happens without you. It is all your being, your gentle good faith, or your seeming cruelty. You are everything of mine. No matter where you are going, nothing happens without you. They place their hearts with you, and you break them. They repent. You break them again. You do all of this yourself. Nothing happens without you. Were something to happen without you, the world would be overturned. The Garden of Eden would turn to hell. Nothing happens without you. If you are a head, I'll become your feet. And if you are a fist, I'll become your flag. If you disappear, I'll turn to nothing. Nothing happens without you. You've disturbed my sleep. You've erased my personality. You've broken every attachment. Nothing happens without you. Should you stop being my beloved, my affairs would be disastrous. My comforter, my dear companion, nothing happens without you. Without you, life would not be delightful, nor death joyous. How can I rebel against your sorrow? Nothing happens without you. Whatever I say, O seal of judges, all seeming good and evil notwithstanding, say it yourself by your grace. Nothing happens without you. So, let's talk about the heart when the heart is numb, as opposed to when the heart is awake and alive. Many of us in the contemporary world are living with numbed hearts, meaning when the heart is not enlivened and healthy and awake, everything out here is just things. Even people are just things that we can exploit, manipulate. But as the heart begins to awaken, we begin to sense not only are human beings tender, sensitive beings, but we begin to experience that this whole life is animate, that there's nothing inanimate. The Native Americans, First Nations, have a good sense of this. For them, all the animals, the trees, the rocks, all have a living quality. To me, this is a sign that the heart is awake. But when the heart shuts down, when it has become numbed, in a lot of ways, sometimes when it becomes numbed, there are only things. And this is a terrible poverty. To live in such a state is less than human. It's a crippled state of our humanness. So the question for all of us is, how do we overcome our numbness, which is often caused by pain or trauma? Sometimes it's caused by overindulgence, which also is often a reaction to our own emotional pain. If we feel emotional pain at one level, we just want to sort of shut it down, and so we indulge in substances or drink or even food or entertainments. All of this contributes to a numbing of the heart. The unnumbing of the heart begins through, first of all, the awakening of presence. By presence, I mean a comprehensive awareness that can, at one time, encompass our thinking, our emotions, our bodily perceptions, our behaviors. In that comprehensive awareness we call presence, and it's close to what some people call mindfulness. In that state of pure presence, when the mind can begin to become a little more quiet, the emotions a little more still, it's then that we can begin to access this deeper level of our experience, which is the heart. The heart, which is an instrument for sensing existence qualitatively and realizing that we live in a universe made up of all of these incredible qualities. For instance, the qualities of awe and majesty, the qualities of tenderness and compassion, the qualities of forgiveness and generosity, the qualities of beauty, of meaning. Now, so far, science has not successfully measured or accounted for this dimension of human experience. Yes, they can measure that the brain may react in a certain way and show a certain waveform when we are in a state of mindfulness, but it doesn't tell us what that waveform actually is, what it feels like. So the heart is also the instrument that senses value. And I mean, this is incredibly important. Imagine if you were a human being living in a world just exactly as the world is through your senses, but you had no sense of value. What would life be like? What would human relationships be like? Take away the tenderness, take away the longing, take away the subtle satisfactions of friendship, of work done well, of even the satisfaction of modest integrity in a human being. The most important things in life are invisible, not visible. And the heart operates in this invisible world, and it's with us all the time. Now, my Sheikh Suleiman Dede, he was a very simple man. The very first time he came to the United States, his message for us barbarians, and we were barbarians at that time, was, keep the love of God in your heart. Keep the love of Allah in your heart, and you will have nothing to fear, and you will be full of energy, and you will love life. And he was a living example of that. This is the simple message. Keep the love of God in your heart. But this is not a theology. This is not a God of any particular religion. It's not a God in a dualistic sense of an ultimate being we have to please or we should fear. It's something much subtler than that. It's something about the nature of reality, that reality itself is love. And there's nothing more important for us to know than to know this. And the only way we're going to truly know it is with this instrument called the heart, which has a different kind of knowing than the brain. Somebody could repeat these words, but without the lived experience of this, and they would just be talking words, and what would it matter? What would it sound like? It would sound like talk. It would just sound like theory. But it's possible to live these truths. It's possible to make it the very core of our experience. So how do we do it? Well, there's so much to be said about this. I almost don't even want to begin. But I'll come back to a few simple things and say, it begins with presence. It begins with that state in which we are whole and in the present moment and not living completely in our heads or preoccupied with desires, comforts, discomforts, and pleasures of the body, but when we are living in an awakened state. That is, all of our faculties working. We're aware of our thoughts, our feelings, our sensory experience. We're whole in this moment. That's what we mean by presence. And I wrote a book called Living Presence, which actually is coming out in a 25th anniversary edition in 2017. Just a book just to talk about presence and how presence can be cultivated. So this is the first step. But presence eventually, presence or mindfulness opens up to heartfulness, or what the Sufis call remembrance of God. And remembrance of God begins to become real when we sense that our presence is related to a vast ocean of presence, and that in a way what we're calling our presence is sourced in something much greater. Yes, I have consciousness. I have a little bit of love. I have, now and then, maybe a little bit of patience, not very much. I have these qualities, but these qualities are not even my own. They're sourced in a vast, infinite ocean of being. This is what we mean by the divine. This is what we mean by God. So when individual presence begins to feel this relationship with the larger, the infinite presence, then we realize this is something very important here. I need this. I need this awareness moment by moment. I need to be grateful. I need to be in a state of wonder. I need to be aware that there is a cosmic intelligence operating in every detail of life. That life is not just an accidental concatenation of events and things randomly impacting each other, but that the universe, this existence, is more like mind and information than it is things. But let me remind us again, that it's not just information and it's not just quantities, it's also a universe of qualities. So from this infinite source, Infinite qualities are manifesting, and those qualities are all here to educate our hearts, to awaken us to the awareness of the true nature of existence, which is an existence of beauty, of generosity, of what religions call grace. So, I don't know, am I talking nonsense? Is this crazy talk? Does this make any sense? It does to me.
It's absolutely beautiful to me.
So, this is very practical. You know, this is lived experience. This is not something to read in a book and think about unless the thinking brings you closer to that experience. There's also another great Sufi named Yunus Emre from the 13th century in Turkey, a illiterate shepherd with a vocabulary of only a few thousand words, who was probably the greatest poet ever in the Turkish language. Would you like to hear a few words from this shepherd, Yunus?
Can you mute your mic when he's responding?
Oh, yeah.
Can you easily do that? Every now and then a little pop will come in. I just want to make sure it was clear.
Okay.
Okay. So, these are the words of Yunus Emre, a 13th century, 14th century Turkish shepherd from Anatolia, that is the Asian part of what is Turkey today. His songs are still sung in Sufi gatherings and recited as poetry. And this is about love and also about the heart. Maybe it'll make a little more sense if we see this as very practical teachings and insights about this methodology of love, this science of love. To be in love with love is to gain a soul, to sit on the throne of hearts. To love the world is to be afflicted. Later, the secrets start to make sense. Don't be a thorn, become the rose. Let your maturity unfold. The thorns will only burn. Prayer was created by God so human beings could ask for help. It's too bad if you haven't learned to ask. Accept the breath of those who are mature. Let it become your divining rod. If you obey only your ego, things turn out wrong. Renouncing the world is the beginning of worship. If you are a believer, believe this. Respect your parents and ancestry, and you will have fine astral clothes one day. But if you earn the complaints of neighbors, you'll stay in hell forever. Yunus heard these words from the masters. If you need this advice, take it. They say one who is received by a heart becomes more beautiful. Thank you, Yunus. So, Rumi said the highest form of love is love with no object. We think of love at the lowest levels as desire, or we fall in love and we want to possess the beloved. Probably, if we're egotistical, we want to control the beloved. But there are higher levels of love that the heart knows. So Rumi says, the highest form of love is love with no object. Meaning, for the human being who attains that state, love is not about possessing something, love is not love for something, love is simply the nature of your being. And you radiate that love and you become a blessing to your environment. And you become, in a way, freer of attachments, naturally, not through some arduous ascetic process of sacrifice. I once asked one of my mentors, a Sufi in Istanbul. I asked him, do we ever attain a state when we no longer feel the need to receive love from others? And he said, yes, when you love. So that's a little bit about love and the heart. I didn't make an explicit connection between them, but obviously they're not two things, they're one thing. It's through the heart that we know love. The experiences of love are the most important experiences of life. They're what we remember, they're what we long for. And many human behaviors are substitutes for love, or clumsy attempts to gain love. But love is deep within our own hearts. Love, and this love of God, as we call it in religious terms, but we don't necessarily need the religious terms. If we understand the metaphysics of it, we can say deep in our human heart, in the core of our being, is a connection with the infinite. And that infinite is generous, gracious, beautiful, and it is the one, I can't call it a thing, but let's say it is the one reality that can truly satisfy this restless human heart. Be aware of your breath. That's always good. That's a good place to begin. Add to that and experience a sensation of your body as you're aware of your breath. Now check in with your heart. What is the state of your heart at this moment? And try and sustain this comprehensive state of awareness in your everyday life. The other thing that helps enormously is to be around people who have developed this presence. And the other thing I said, the reason I said it's the first step, even though it's infinite, it's not like you do it and that's it. Presence can be deepened infinitely. But in that process of deepening, you begin to realize that it's not just my presence, I'm not just developing this self-awareness that is limited to me, but it begins to have, it begins to reach into the universe. It begins to open into an ocean of presence, an ocean of grace, an ocean of beauty and love. That presence and all of our most important human qualities are, to use religious language, sourced in God. If you don't like that language, you can easily substitute something else. But sourced in infinite being, sourced in an invisible dimension of reality that, while invisible, is nevertheless, even in a sense, more real, more important, more precious than this three-dimensional or four-dimensional time-space continuum. This time-space continuum is just the theater in which the attributes of the divine, the attributes of spirit, manifest. And we're here to understand and experience this theater qualitatively, so that we begin to sense that there is a source to all of this, and that source is longing to be known. It is longing to be in relationship to you. And that your greatest satisfaction as a human being will come when you enter into that relationship. This is what we mean by worship. But by worship we don't mean a ritual or ceremony. And this is what we mean by prayer. But by prayer we don't mean asking for something. We mean a relationship, a conscious relationship with something intensely spiritual, intensely real, loving, generous, beautiful. And when we have that experience, as it grows in us, as it becomes, you might say, our baseline, everything in life changes. We have fears, we have disappointments, we have sorrow, we have pain, we have all these things, but they're in a way transformed because we know we're living in love's universe, and we know that how we relate to the challenges of life and even the pain of life, how we relate to all this is enriching and developing our souls. And that maybe this life, this existence, is a place for the development and the education of souls. Maybe the nature of reality is to cultivate souls. Souls being conscious entities that can fall in love with God. Because what we mean by God is something very beautiful. And that's coming back to the Rumi poem, nothing happens without you. This changes the nature of all of our experiences. It puts us into it gives us a kind of intimacy with the purpose behind existence. We now feel that nothing is a waste, nothing is random, nothing is purely accidental. Everything is part of our own, if I may say so, individually designed curriculum of the heart. Because there's nothing, the heart is the most precious thing in the universe. Everything wants to get into your heart. Everything wants a place in your heart. Presidential candidates want a place in your heart. Coca-Cola wants a place in your heart, etc., etc. Well, what are you going to make central to your heart? So Rumi says in another poem, a man dies and he comes before God and he's carrying bags of gold. And God says, what's all this garbage here? What are you bringing me this for? Bring me the heart. If your heart is pleased with you, then I am pleased with you. And they asked the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, they said, what is sin? He said simply, sin is what troubles your heart. Leave it behind. So the heart is central. Paying attention to the heart is our guide. And yes, there are disciplines. It requires commitment. It requires the practice of attention and meditation in one form or another. For Sufis, meditation is maybe half an hour in the morning and otherwise 24/7. It's every breath is our meditation. We take a little time, not a lot of time, we take a little time, a half hour a day, or maybe an hour a day, including our ritual prayer, which is an embodied form of worship, to actualize this state of heartfulness, of awareness. But the rest of our day is just living, serving, being creative, being beneficial to humanity, but always with an awareness of this greater context, and always referring to the heart as what's needed now, what's next, what do I need to pay attention to? Consult with your heart. Bring your mind into your heart. Your heart truly is your mind. The mind separated from the heart is a pretty useless instrument. It can mislead us. But the mind brought into the heart, the thinking mind serving the heart, allows us to be practical. So it all comes back to this incredible faculty that we call the heart, which is an array of, you could say, subtle subconscious faculties. What if you had a sense, just as you have a sense for sight, or a sense of smell, or a sense of taste, what if you also had a sense for unity? A sense in your own being that could encompass the unity of existence, that could make you feel at one with the trees, with the garden, with other human beings, with the atmosphere, with the oceans. Well, you do have that sense, whether you're aware of it or not, explicitly, and it can be developed. It can become your primary organ of perception. Well, you see evidence for this if you look at the greatest souls of humanity, if you look at a Saint Francis, or a Rumi, or a Muhammad, or a Jesus. They all could hear the stones speak. They could all communicate with nature, with natural living beings. They were not alienated from existence. They were at one with it. So this is our natural human state. This is not just for those, 1 in a million kinds of people. Yes, we know of them and we remember them and honor them, but this is something for every human being to attain according to our own capacities, to make life more livable, and to satisfy our hearts, because actually, ultimately nothing else will satisfy the heart. And there's a saying, and actually it comes from the Quran, that says, indeed, in the remembrance of God, hearts find tranquility. In the remembrance of God, hearts find tranquility. Remembering God in this case means remembering God here and now in every circumstance of your life. It means connecting to that invisible, so-called invisible, but very tangible, very meaningful experience of unity, of spirit, of beauty, of grace. So indeed, in the remembrance of God, hearts find tranquility. You're not going to find it by buying a new Tesla or by your latest iPad Pro. Little commercials here, huh? Forgive me. I'm just making fun of, our consumer world. It's not what satisfies the heart for very long, is it? What if it really is our natural state to have an awakened heart, but that through miseducation, through the ignorance prevailing in society today, which has become overly mental, overly utilitarian, overly egotistical, that we are, in a sense, miseducated, and the heart is denied. The experience of the heart is devalued. It's not encouraged. What if there might have been, and maybe there still are, traditional societies where the heart was better understood? And so at the same time, that's one part of it. We are crippled. Our hearts are crippled by the prevailing values and the false reality that surrounds us. The false reality, a reality created by and for egos. And yet, there is a maturing process that is possible and necessary. That the heart is such a precious faculty that it is like it deserves to be cultivated. Not everybody, even a Mozart with his precociousness, still needed to train. He needed a teacher too, to bring forth even his precociousness. People who are artists, people who are healers, people who are whatever walk of life, we are developable beings. But let us not neglect the role that the heart plays in the development of every aspect of human development, whether it be medicine. With heart, you'll be a better doctor. You'll have intuitions. You'll have a quality of perception and openness that a person without heart will not have. In every sphere of life, heart will enhance performance. It's the ultimate performance enhancer. Even if you lose in the Olympics, even if you come in last, if you have heart, you're winning. True. Hearts can become diseased. I'm speaking literally and metaphorically. Hearts can become diseased. They can become hardened. And this leads to certain physical conditions. At the same time, people's hearts can be broken. People can die of a broken heart. I know of a Sufi sheikh. Actually, he was living in Jerusalem, and after certain very terrible events that he witnessed, he died of a broken heart. So we also need to strengthen our hearts. And again, it is the love of God, trust in the purposefulness of existence that leads to a strengthening of the heart. So the human being as a whole, we are holistic creatures, and our spiritual well-being is related to our physical well-being. People forget that we have an innate capacity to experience the infinite. And by the infinite, I don't mean some mental abstraction. I mean something expansive and regenerative. That we have a right to this experience. It's even an ecstatic experience. We have a right to it. Not only that, we have a need for it. And the cheap substitutes we seek will never quite do it. But for our own health and well-being, we need some experience of the divine. The best of teachers will do this naturally if they're compassionate and if they're caring. But it tends to get lost in the teenage years as the focus of education becomes more mental, more instrumental, more strictly career-oriented. So for some, education is more and more, year by year in this country, education is becoming utilitarian. It's, it's to help us fit into a certain kind of economy. It's not really education. It's something else. It's programming. So yeah, the education of the heart needs to be reintroduced, needs to be understood and developed consciously. And to do that within our own system today, we may need to find the right language to present it to people so they don't think it's something sort of woo-woo, But I think it's quite a reasonable proposition. I think from this conversation that we're having, do you think there's a rationale for educating the heart? Even relativity theory and quantum theory may reveal some absolutely amazing, mind-boggling truths, but it is not the science of qualities. It is still not what touches our inmost and important subjective experience, namely an experience of meaning and value. I think these two sciences are not antagonistic. They need to be reunified. Thank you. When I used to lead the whirling dervishes on tour as a sheikh and give an introduction to the ceremony, one of the things we would always say is, view this ceremony with your heart, not with your mind. And that seemed to be a good preparation to shift people to a different kind of perception. Yeah. The heart unifies, the heart affirms. It's intellect that analyzes, segregates, and denies and negates. But the heart is also that power in ourselves that can say a true yes.